I want to tell you some very basic things, right? About the early in the game, what you have to do and what you shouldn't do. That's very important, and you always keep that in mind. Okay, here is a chessboard, right? They are all 64 squares, but there are 4 of them that are a lot more important than the other 60. You know which they are?
The center.
The center, absolutely correct, yes. This is what we call the center, right? Those 4 squares. And early in the game, whether you're playing black or with the white pieces, that's what you have to focus on. What does it mean? A, you want to put 1 or 2 pawns if you can there, in one of those 4 squares, or you want to attack it with your knights and bishops and pawns, right? So most of the time you would start the game either with pawn move to e4 or pawn move to d4. Both are equally good moves, right? Because it occupies the center and attacks another center square and opens up the bishop's diagonal. So you're accomplishing a lot of things here at the same time. Now let's say black plays g6. It's not a bad move, it's an opening, but it doesn't fight for the center right away. Now, when you're given that opportunity, what should you do?
D4.
D4, very good. Put another pawn in the center. That means you have full control of the center, right? You are having 2 of your pawns there, while black has none, and these 2 pawns attack also the other 2 center squares, which black can start fighting for, but in the meantime, white is doing good. Now, of course, black has to at least try to fight from the side, right? Bishop g7 is the best move because now the bishop attacks also 2 center squares. Very, very important. Now, what's the next thing we should do after we put the 2 pawns in the center?
Protect them.
Yes and no, yes?
Develop your pieces.
Develop your pieces in a way that they do what?
Can control the center.
Control the center, correct, absolutely. Now, normally, which side do you prefer to develop first? The king side or the queen side?
King side.
The king side. Why is that?
So you can castle.
So you can castle, absolutely correct, yes. You usually want to develop your king side first because on the king side, which is this part of the board, right, all of this side, there are only 2 pieces in between the king and the rook, and then you can castle quickly on this side, and we want to put our king in safety early, so the king will be in safety. Sometimes people decide to castle on the queen side, but that takes more time, because in that case you also need to remove your queen out of the way. So that is why, let's say knight to f3 would be a very good move. Now let's say black makes a silly move, right? Why is that move silly?
It doesn't control the center.
Because it does not control the center. It's good because it develops, but in the wrong direction. So sometimes developing in the wrong direction is worse than not developing it at all. Because if you don't develop it yet, you still have a potential of next move develop it in the right direction. But when you already went in the wrong direction, it's even more time to correct the mistake. Okay, so now we're ready to develop another piece, which should be the...
Sorry?
Which should be the next piece we develop?
Bishop.
The bishop, very good. The one on? Which bishop?
The king side.
The king side bishop, absolutely. Where should we develop it? C4. C4 is fine, or D3 is fine, right? Because both of them, this one controls the D5 center square, or D3 would control the E4 center square. Now, what do you think black should do? Castle, right. Black should castle, but black didn't. Black made a silly move, playing A5. Silly, right? It's laughable. That's what black did. Ignoring the principles of chess. And you always get punished when you ignore the rules, right? That's not a good thing to do. Okay, so here, white is following the principles of chess, developing, putting the king in safety, right? So therefore, next move is
Castle.
castle, correct. Very good. So we're doing very, very well. And now, black made another silly move. Pushing the pawn up to a4, right? Now, this is bad because it didn't develop a new piece. And, as we know, we should not move the same piece twice early in the game. That's wasting time. As we did, we're moving one different piece every time, right? Developing all the pieces. So first you develop each of your pieces, and only later you regroup them to different places and improve their positions. Of course, what's an exception to that?
Knight to c3.
Well, knight to c3 is a good next move. But what's the exception to move the same piece a second time early in the game?
If it's going to like make a threat.
If it's being threatened, right? Let's think somebody would attack this bishop. The bishop would need to move, right? Or being defended. Okay, so knight c3, that's a very good next move, right? We're getting out. The knight controls the center squares again. Now a move that some beginner players would do, moving the rook out from the side. Not a good thing, right? The rooks don't come out from the side. That's very, very rare in chess when that happens. That's an exception when that's good. Usually 99% of the time that's a bad thing. What you're supposed to do, as White did, developed all the pieces, and then later in the game you would trade eventually one of these two pawns, assuming that black would also put a pawn in the center, as he should sooner or later, and that's how you open a file, right, by let's say these two disappearing, and then there would be an open file, and that's where the rook should come from the sides, this way, and not up that way, okay? So that's very important. Rooks don't come to the game from the side. No good. Okay, now we have one more minor piece to develop, the dark square bishop. Where should we put it?
f4.
f4, it's a perfect square, right? Nice harmony. White developed all the pieces in a nice shape.
Bull's head.
Sorry?
With the bull's head opening.
Bull's head opening? Yeah, it can be called like that too. Yeah. White is having a beautiful setup, beautiful control of the center. Okay, black made another bad move, moving the knight in the wrong direction again. Right? No good. White is doing the right thing, black is doing the wrong thing. Now, the next step is getting the queen out of the way in between the two rooks. That is how we connect rooks. Okay? And now, right away with this move, we also attack the knight, because there is a battery between the queen and the bishop. The bishop is threatening now to capture that knight on h6. So the knight has to move, or needs to be protected. Knight moved to g4. And really, this is only the part I wanted to show you about this opening of the game, because this is the principle, the guideline, how you should start each and every game. Don't get tempted to get your queen out early. No good. Don't try to win with getting the queen and the bishop out quickly. No good. Don't move the same piece a second time early in the game, or a third time. Right? Always develop your pieces looking towards the center. Okay? So that's the basic principles how you start out in a game. Now, in a normal situation, when your opponent plays better than this, when black played in this game, the next thing you would do is open files. When there are, how do we open files? We open files by trading a pair of pawns, because that's where your rooks can get into the game. So that's usually the next stage. And looking out for weaknesses in the opponent's position, which side he left unprotected, or square is weak, things like that. Okay? Now we're going to see some fun tactical positions. Okay? Little tricks of forks and discoveries and skewers and mates. Okay? That's going to be a lot of fun. this is a very simple position, endgame position, right? Not that many pieces left. White has a queen, black has 2 rooks in return, which almost balances itself out. In fact, the 2 rooks theoretically is a little bit more than a queen. Each rook is worth how many points? 5 points. That's 2 rooks, that's 10 points, while a queen is only worth 9 points. So in fact, materially speaking in this position, black is ahead. But it's white's turn, which is very important. And what would you play?
E5.
Queen to e5. That is the correct move. So here we have to notice an opportunity, a geometric motif of the rook being an unprotected square, and the queen is able to move up and create a fork, meaning attacking both black's king and rook at the same time. Okay, so this is a basic idea of the fork, that with one piece you attack 2 or more pieces. Just like a real fork that you eat with, right? You may pick up a piece of potato with the meat at the same time. Okay, we're having this position. Look at the position first. Always look, what does the opponent want to do? What does black want to do in this position? Can anybody tell me what black wants to do in this position?
Checkmate.
Black wants to checkmate, right? Black wants to checkmate right here. Moreover, black also threatens to bring his rook down to c1, which also would result checkmate in 2 moves. However, we're lucky. It's white's turn. Now, how could we protect this checkmate?
Knight h4.
With the knight, right? Moving the knight here. The problem is that only protects this checkmate and not the other one, with the rook coming down to c1, the black rook. Moving down here, right? And then after the king moves out of the check, the queen or the rook checkmates in the corner. We cannot allow that to happen. But thanks to a forking combination, white can not only save the game but win the game. You see that already?
Yeah.
Wow.
Knight to d4.
Wait. Knight d4 is a fork, I agree. But you forgot about the checkmate, right? What's the move?
Queen c6, sack the queen for the rook, and then the king would take.
Very
And then
good.
you would fork and get the queen.
Queen captures the rook, check. We are sacrificing our queen for a rook only, right? And the reason is that if and when the king captures our queen, then the knight comes to d4, forking, and as a result we're gaining a whole rook, right? In case black does not capture the queen, for example, moves out of the check, then already we can safely protect the g2 square by moving to h4 or e3, and no more checkmate for black. Okay? Let's see another example. Okay, we are having our next position here. Black is a pawn up, right? So black is doing, materially speaking, better. We are having a nice pin on the 7th rank with our rook on the knight. So those are certainly things to notice right away. The question is, how can white here gain material?
The rook would take f7, and then the king would take back, and you could fork the king and the rook.
Very good. That's absolutely correct. Before we show the correct solution here, let me just point out that if you play here immediately queen to d5, which almost seems to work as well, it attacks the rook in the corner as well as the knight on f7. That is not quite good, because how can black defend both of them at the same time? Can anybody tell me? Black even has 2 different ways to do that. Black can bring the queen back to f8 to protect both, or black can simply move the rook to f8, which is better than moving the queen back to a defensive position. However, the correct solution is capturing knight captures, rook captures knight, and if king captures rook, then we give queen d5 check, and the rook will be lost, and as a result, white wins the knight. Okay, so we saw what a fork is about, right? Now we're going to see some discovered checks. Now, discovered checks are very, very powerful because discovered check means that you are able to put your piece that moves away and makes the discovered check to a square where normally it could be hit. Okay, here is a very simple example of discovery of discovered check, winning material by making a discovered check. The battery we see along the A1, H8 diagonal, and the discovery always involves three parties. There is two attackers and one on the defensive side, right? In this case, we have the white bishop, the white knight versus the black king. There is always the one behind that will be discovered and will give the attack or the check. The one that moves and the one that's being attacked, right? Always three parties involved. So in this case, the white knight is the jumping one, and the beauty of it is it can move to a square, but normally it could not. And what is that square?
F5.
F5, correct. So white can capture black's pawn on F5, and of course it looks like a fork, but it's not good because it's a fork, because if it would be just a fork, the pawn could capture the knight, but because it is a discovered check, it's a double check for that matter. Both the white bishop and the white knight is checking the black king. Only one can black get rid of. Black cannot get off either, I'm sorry. And therefore, the king must get out of the check, and then the knight wins the queen. So that's a very simple version of discovery. Now let's see a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, in this position, black seems to be in a very good position. Right? Black has a queen, while white doesn't. And it's a tricky position. And it's a little bit deceiving of what you first may think. So you need to double check, and that's a very important lesson. Don't always think the first thing you think of is necessarily the best. It may be, but you may need to double check if you have a better move than you think you see. What do you think is the best move?
What I was looking at first was D7.
Knight D7?
Later I saw F3.
Okay, very good. Let me discuss these further. You said you first saw Knight D7, right? Which would create a discovered check and attack the rook. And then you saw a better one, right? Retreating the knight to F3 instead of D7, making a discovered check and attacking black's strongest, most valuable piece, the queen. And neither of them is the right solution. Okay? Why? If you return here, true, you're winning a queen, right? The black king will get out of the check. You capture the queen, but after this, black will capture the pawn on F2, making a fork. Remember, we just learned about the fork. And when you either block the check or move the king out of the check, black will pick up our bishop, and black will be still in a serious material advantage. And black will win the game.
Knight G6, take check.
Knight to G6 is a double check, so it cannot be taken. But after the king moves out to G8, that's not a checkmate, and you're in
No, that's not.
a very bad position because black is now up a queen, right?
No.
Knight E7, the king can get out of, or the knight can be taken, so that's not so great. Okay, so what's the checkmate?
I think he does.
If you could only
So knight to G4.
Knight to G4, that's almost. Okay, let's see. Knight to G4, if king G8, then,
Knight to H6.
okay, that's the idea, but not the right solution. That's the idea. Why is it not quite correct? Because after knight g4, black gets the opportunity to sacrifice his rook and therewith open up some air for the king to escape. And even after losing the rook, black is still ahead, having his queen. So therefore, the correct solution is knight f7, because this is a double check, and as we know, when we give double check, the double check cannot be blocked ever, right? And neither can either of the check-giving pieces be taken. So the king must move, unlike a regular check. The king must move, and now we're ready to give the check.
H6.
Okay, that was the trick. Tricky, right? We could almost win the rook,
I saw
win
that.
the queen, almost checkmate, a lot of misleading ideas. And this is the only correct one.
I saw if you could put the knight to h6, it would be a checkmate because he couldn't move anymore.
Okay, now we change the situation a tiny bit. And I want you to tell me, how did the story change? Okay, I changed very little in the position, right? Not much. Anybody notices the difference? What's the difference?
The rook can't sacrifice itself.
That's true, the rook cannot sacrifice itself. But what's the important difference? Why doesn't the same solution work, the one we just saw?
The pawn on f7.
Well, remember what was the solution the other time? We played knight f7 and then knight h6, right? So the pawn would disappear right after we capture it. So how is it different?
Oh, the pawn can move up.
No, if we capture it, it cannot move up. What's the difference in the position? I made very tiny difference.
The queen's location.
The queen's location, and how does it affect the position?
It's covering h6.
It's covering h6, correct, yes. So when we would move our knight to h6, all of a sudden, instead of being checkmate, the queen would just hit it, in fact, with a check, right? So that same solution does not work this time. So you have to search for a new one. What is the correct solution here? Now this situation is even worse because our bishop is under attack, right? And that's something you have to be very careful about, discovered checks. What's your idea?
Knight to g6 check.
Very good. Hold it. Let me finish about this. What would be wrong about moving the knight back to f3 here to win the black queen?
Like, king can get away.
The king can go away. Well, that wouldn't be that terrible because then we capture the knight. With the knight, the queen.
The queen would capture the bishop.
Right. That's something you always have to keep in mind when you give a discovered check like this, that when you move away to make a discovery to win, let's say, a queen, making sure that the piece that is giving the discovered check, like the bishop, cannot be taken, as it can be in this case, because then the whole thing backfires. Okay, so you're right. The correct solution is knight taking the pawn on f7, which is a double check again, and as I mentioned already, when you are giving a double check, neither of the pieces can be taken although both are under attack, right? The king must move. I'm sorry, that's a double check, but not the right one.
That one's g.
This is the right one. You're right. You said the right thing. Knight to g6, sorry. This double check. In either case, the king only can move, but the important difference is that after this double check,
Knight moves to e7.
the knight can move to e7 now, and there is a checkmate. Right? Quite pretty. Correct? Okay. After learning the previous checkmates, can you figure out how can white checkmate here in 3 moves? First, you need to notice what black wants to do.
I see the.
What does
I
black
see
want?
the checkmate for white.
Okay, first, what does black want to do? Always you need to keep in mind what does the opponent want to do. You cannot ignore that.
Checkmate by putting the queen on g2.
That's right. That's what black wants to do. So what does that mean? That means that we do not have time to make any quiet move. Right? Because if you make a quiet move, meaning a move that's not a check, you are getting checkmated first. You see the solution?
Knight can go to e2, and then queen take, then white's queen goes down to g7.
Well, that's a good idea, but remember what I just said. If you don't make a move with a check, black will have time to do what he wants to do. A, he can, for example, block up this diagonal and save himself from his problems. Besides that, black can still checkmate, not in one move, but in two, starting to give the checks from e1, forcing the king out to h2, and now the queen is ready to checkmate in the corner. Right? So again, I said that you don't have the time to make a quiet move, so you need to search for forceful moves.
Sacrifice the queen on g7, forcing the...
That's correct, yes. We do want to sacrifice the queen on g7, and that's a beautiful move. You're giving up a queen for nothing, right? Only to force the king into the discovered check. That's what we're doing. King captures, and now we can give double checks on two squares, but only one of them works. And what is that square? On knight to f5, correct? We want to make sure the king cannot run away on h6. And then when the king moves back to g8, the checkmate comes from
h6.
Not h6, careful. The queen is there. On e7, right? h6 would not work because the queen would capture, but knight to e7 does work. Okay, that's the solution. Okay, now we move on to something else. We move on to pins. Okay, that's a very important tool in chess. We use it in many different ways, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Okay, in this position, white can create a very basic and simple pin. What's the move?
Bishop b2.
That's right. Making this move, bishop to b2. Again, the pin is also involving three parties. Here there is the pinning piece, the bishop. There is the pinned piece, the rook. And then there is the piece behind the pinned piece. And here that's the king. Okay, now the black rook is in trouble. The trouble is it cannot move away, right? Because the king can never be left in check. This is called absolute pin. That's right. There are absolute pins and there are relative pins. Relative pin would be if instead of the king being here, there would be a black queen, right? Then the rook could move away, but the queen would be in trouble, losing. Okay, now this is not it. We have more to this position than just making this one simple move. Now, after the pin, let's say black moves one of his pawns. He cannot move the king out of the pin. I mean, he can, but then he loses the whole rook, not even getting the bishop as compensation. So let's assume that black will move, let's say, a pawn up, trying to create a passed pawn with his pawn majority on the queen side. So black moves the pawn up. Now, white has an obvious choice, capturing the rook with the bishop, when we would win a so-called exchange. When we're winning a rook for a bishop or a knight, that means winning an exchange. And white certainly has that opportunity. However, if you look at it closer, you will notice that after that trade, that winning exchange, black would be still a pawn ahead. And in a pawn endgame, that's a decisive advantage. When there are no other pieces on the board, just the kings and pawns, that is a decisive advantage. So therefore here white can do something better than immediately capturing that rook. And namely, it is to try to attack that rook another time and get it for full, not losing the bishop at all. And that move is, what's that move? Pawn g4, correct. Absolutely, that is the move, playing pawn g4. And the beauty of the pin is that black cannot get out of it. That's the beauty of it. And now white simply, next move, will play g5, and then already the bishop or the pawn can capture the rook without losing the bishop. And that's a very important point, without losing the bishop. And also, black playing g5 would not help, because then this pawn would get to g5 with the same purpose, pinning the rook, and now white already won a pawn as well. Black is pinning the white bishop, right? We cannot move our bishop away because it's in an absolute pin. It absolutely cannot move. However, black's bishop is also in a pin, and we can take advantage of that.
Rook could go to c8.
That's correct. So here, we don't need to worry about our problem, our pin here, but the preference is to give the checkmate by playing rook to c8, checkmate. So this is a perfect example how we're using the pin to checkmate. Let's see another one. Okay, this is our next position. It's white to move. How can white checkmate here in 2 moves? Again, we are involving the pin, right? Where is the pinned piece?
The pin piece is, there's 2 on the board. That's the pawn on f2 for white, and the bishop on b7.
Absolutely correct. White's pawn on f2 is pinned, and so is black's bishop on b7. What's the move?
Queen take a6.
That's right. Very good. Queen takes a6 check. Right, the queen cannot be taken because the bishop is pinned. The king moves b8.
c7.
Queen takes b7, capturing the bishop, and checkmates. That's right. Okay, now let's see an example where we are using the pin to win material. Here we are having already an existing pin, right? First of all, we need to determine where is the pinned piece. The pinned piece is the knight on d4, correct. Now, if you look at the material distribution on the board, white has an extra queen. However, black has enough compensation. Black has 2 extra knight and the bishop, and they are each worth 3 points, so that equals to a queen's value, 9 points. And the problem is for black that the knight on d4 is pinned, and therefore, despite seemingly protecting the bishop on e6, it does not, and we can play
Rook to e6.
That's right, rook capturing bishop on e6, and we won a free bishop. Very good. Okay, we're having this position. Again, another endgame where it's almost balanced. White has 2 rooks, black has a queen, and that we cannot make a pin right away. But what can we do?
Rook to a1.
Very good.
The king over.
Very good. Here we first force the king onto the same file as the queen is on, because as we know, when we're making a pin, all 3 parties have to be either on the same file, rank, or diagonal, right? So that's what we're doing. We're forcing the king to come over to the B file where black's queen is, and now we're ready to pin with either rook, right? Moving to
b1.
B1, correct. Either rook can move to B1, and black will lose his queen and at most getting only a rook as compensation. Very good. Okay, the next item we'll do, a last one more or two more examples of removing the guard. Okay, you know what's removing a guard? When a certain piece is protecting a square, whether it's being a checkmate or protecting another piece. We'll see one of each of those examples. Okay, we're having this position here, right? Looks like a pretty close position. Black is in fact a pawn ahead, although their king is a little bit more vulnerable, right in the middle of the board, while white's king is nicely secured behind his pawns. But here that's not the issue. Here the issue is that black's queen is protected by the king, and what we need to do is pull one hand of the king away, and then the other one cannot hold on to the queen. That's what we need to do here. With the move,
Rook c7.
that's very correct. Yes, we are giving up a rook on purpose. So after the king captures the rook, then the queen can capture the queen, and we want material. Moreover, we even made a fork right away, winning black's rook next as well. Okay, and we'll see one more last position when one of the black pieces will protect the checkmate, and we'll have to pull away that piece from protecting the checkmating square. This is our last position for today, and in this position black has material advantage. Black is attacking the rook on d1, and black has a dangerous looking attack against our king. On our side is that our queen and pawn have created a checkmate pattern there, that we're almost ready to checkmate with the queen to b7. However, for this moment, the knight is still guarding that, and therefore our goal is to remove the guard, right? With
Rook to d6.
With rook capturing on d6, correct? And black is helpless to protect that square on b7, and therefore black is lost. And black is too slow with his own attack, because he's almost there, right? Almost ready to checkmate himself, but too late, one move too late. The white queen checkmates first by going to b7. So thank you for your attention. I hope you learned some and had some fun. I'd like to welcome you all to this segment of Winning Chess the Easy Way. On this tape, you'll see a lot of fun things and some instructional games. You'll see us in Las Vegas. I'll be here with my sisters, Judith and Sophia. We are playing a unique event, our first ever triplex simul, playing against 81 players at once. And you'll see segments from that. You'll see us in the Breakfast with the Polgar Sisters, where there are question and answers from all the different fans, and an interview with Paul Truong about how to improve your game. Also, you'll see 3 of my favorite instructional games that are very interesting, and I enjoy playing them and I enjoy showing them over and over. I think they are very clear how to develop a plan and how to attack. Sit back, enjoy, have a good time.